I think I will start off by saying, when we talk about corporate governance, and when you think about corporate governance, and I'm getting back to your question in a moment, please don't think of it as a straitjacket, as something which is imposed on you, as something which you have to do, but don't really want to do. Think of it as a tool, as an opportunity to be more successful. And then it becomes quite a different kind of, let me say, animal, a different kind of approach. Because you say, what can I do to make my company, our company, more successful? Now, as Leon put it, if you have an owner who is at the same time the entrepreneur, then there is corporate governance, but it's all within the head of the owner, the entrepreneur. But then as companies grow and families grow, it is not as easy. And you have to set up systems which will allow, let's say, an owner family to influence a company, although the owner family consists of maybe 10, 15, 100 people. And at the same time, as the company is successful, it will have to have a management which is independent of day-to-day influence of the owner family, but still is controlled. So you have, not only in theory, but in practice, a dichotomy, a difference, let's say, of thrust, a difference of goals between an owner family, or maybe an owner state, and owners in general, and the company. And that is the question of corporate governance. The basic question is, how do we get the owner family to speak with one voice? How do we get clear signals from the owners? And on the other hand, how can we assure that companies stay successful, although the entrepreneur, the man or the woman who founded the company, is no longer there? And we see a number of family companies fail because of that lack of leadership, which is a necessity, which cannot be avoided, because you have a big, strong personality at the helm of a company, and if he or she moves out, then there is lack of leadership. You have to do something.
Let's be more practical. Let's talk about a founder, a patriarch, somebody who is really powerful, who runs the family and runs the business. He's very successful. How can we convince that person, while he's still at the peak, that this process is something which is positive?
I'll answer your question with the example of Hinkle, where I've been working for 40 years. Hinkle is a German detergent factory, started out that way. It's now an international company with about 50,000 employees and 12 billion euros in sales, and still family controlled. It was founded by a Mr. Hinkle in 1876. Then his sons took over the business, and then his grandsons and were still managers in the business. And it was only in 1980, when I became the first chief executive officer from the outside, that the family gave up, so to speak, the day-to-day management of the business. And from then on, we had a chief executive officer on the one hand, and a chairman, in this particular case, Dr. Hinkle, on the other hand. Now this process, if you take 1876 to 1980, took 100 years. You don't have that time. I think you cannot go on slowly shifting from one paradigm, from one set of approaches to another, and wait for a long time. And that is why I think that you have to think actively about corporate governance in the fast-moving times of today, and actively institute new systems.
what are the main arguments, or what were the main arguments for the family to say, okay, let's invite a non-family professional and give him the steering wheel for our company? What are the main rational business arguments for splitting the roles of CEO and chairman?
Maybe there are two major arguments. And one of them applies to all big families, the other one doesn't have to apply to big families. The one argument was that you have a wider choice of talent if you choose outside your family. You have a wider choice. It may be that within your family, own a family, you find the right person. But it doesn't always have to be so. On the other hand, if you look at the family, it is very difficult for 60, 40, 50 owners to pick out one person who will run the business, which is owned by all the family, and who will continuously have the trust of the total family. And of course, within the family, within any family, I mean, if you have sons and daughters or grandsons, granddaughters, it's a given. There will be differences of opinion. And these differences of opinion, if possible, should not spill over into the company. And that is why I say owner families should speak with one voice. And they should set up a corporate system which will assure that whatever their differences of opinion are, within the company, they will speak with only one voice. We might take it from there, what should this voice be, but I think the emphasis is on this. Whether you hire outside management or not, I think it is easier to have outside management because of the distance that there should be between the outside chief executive and an inside chairman. It is easier to have the right kind of tension. You know, there are wrong kinds of tension and right kinds of tension in any relationship. The right kind of tension is, let's say, you discuss among yourselves what kind of school should the daughter or the son go to. And there will be differences of opinion, and the differences of opinion have to come on the table, and that's the right kind of tension. But there's a wrong kind of tension, where an issue suddenly becomes a point of accusation from one to the other, where one brother says to the other, but you are always of the opinion that such and such is not right. And this wrong kind of tension, which happens, it's a fact of life, should not spill over into the company, because it's bad for the company. You know, when you work in a family-owned company like I did for 40 years, you sort of listen to the voices coming from the family. And the voices are different. And you have to shut your ears a little bit, because you cannot satisfy all the different wishes of different family members. Some who want to have their sons work in the business, others who want the company to invest in certain places, and so on and so forth. So, to make it very clear, corporate governance in family-owned companies provides for the family to speak with one voice. And second, corporate governance, in most cases, and that's the next question we might enter into, asks for a split between the responsibilities of the chairman coming out of the family and a chief executive officer, often coming out of the family, but not necessarily coming out.
Isn't there a very clear benefit of having non-family CEO when it comes to difficulties?
Well, the major benefit, and things do happen, if you're not satisfied with the work done by an outside CEO, you can always fire him. If you're not satisfied with an inside CEO, let's say your brother or your uncle or whatever, you cannot fire him. A member of the family is always a member of the family. And if a family is not satisfied with what is being done, and it doesn't happen in every family, but in many families it does, there's no way out. And quite often the company breaks down or is physically split. I can tell you of a number of German companies which I've known where the company was broken up because of family rifts, and because they were not able to agree on the management by insiders. If they had management by outsiders, it would have been easy, because the outsider would have influenced the family, not in terms of straightening out family feuds, he cannot do that, but in terms of presenting the interests of the company in a definite way. And so I go back to what I said before, the interests of the company, which are on a higher scale the same interests as the interests of the family owning company, and the interests of the family do not always easily coincide. And corporate governance is a method of aligning these two sets of interests.
Let's move to two, I believe, crucial questions. First one, when we talk chairman CEO split, we actually talk about the structure of power. You have been in different roles. You have been a non-family CEO who had to deal with a chairman, a family chairman, and you have been chairman of a huge family business that was actually called in because different branches of the families could not agree. So can you talk a little bit about this, which is essential, but you don't see this in books or discussions, this power issue, which is very relevant also for founder to be able to deal with the issue that somebody else will be CEO?
If I'm right, I think about 90% of the American companies, the US companies, have a president, a chairman, let's put it this way, a chairman and chief executive officer who is the same person. They have one person. The job of chairman and chief executive is not separated. In the UK, United Kingdom, it is almost always separated, although they have one board only, one tier board. And in Germany, for instance, and many European countries, there is by law a separation between the executive committee and the supervisory committee. So what we're talking about here is not a practice which is prevalent everywhere. But it is my firm belief that it makes sense to split the job of chairman and chief executive, and to come back to the power question, at the same time have a division of power. And the division of power works very well if the two people involved recognize their respective responsibilities and their respective power faculties to implement what they want to do. Is this, let's not talk about the founder here, but let's talk about American chairman and chief executive officers. They don't want to give up power. Power, when you have it, you don't easily give it up. Everywhere, in politics and whatever. But to yield a certain amount of power in order to achieve better results is a good thing. And I think everybody should learn that. In the United Kingdom, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was just like in the United States. The chairman was almost always the chief executive officer. Now, out of the 100 leading companies in the United Kingdom, the FTSE companies, the biggest ones, I think there are only a couple which still have a chairman who is at the same time the chief executive officer. They have learned the hard way to split the two responsibilities. And they have, at the same time, if you split responsibilities, you have to some extent split power. And that's a fact of life, but it's a good thing, because I still believe absolute power in a company is as detrimental as it can be in other walks of life.
The second important element is educating owners. As Nick said at the beginning, I do have the privilege to work around the world. And I have seen this times and again how companies grow, and on the other side, the owners do not grow equally, so to say. It's like a given. As an owner, I don't need to get educated. I don't need to evolve, which is a typical example of a potential disaster in a family business. If the company grows very successfully and family governance is not put in place, it cannot cope with that. I would really like you to share with us some of your experiences. How can family do that? What is family governance? What are these main elements that should be included in order that the family would be able, on the end of the day, to speak with one voice, as you said before?
Well, if you take a normal family, within 2-3 generations, out of the entrepreneur ownership, with ownership by 40 or 50 people. And we still talk about entrepreneur families, which in fact most of these people are not. They are owners, but they cannot be, in that company anyway, entrepreneurs. So they must, you said educate, they must recognize it's not an education process, it's a self-identification process. They must recognize their new role, that they cannot be entrepreneurs, but they can be owners. And as owners, they can influence the company in such a way which is beneficial to the company and to the family. And there are methods for doing that. Let's say if you're 40, 50 people, or in a few cases, one of the biggest German companies has 600 owners, family owners. Another one, for which I was a member of the shareholders committee, had 200 owners. They set up an internal kind of democracy, an internal kind of system, and the watchword here is shareholders committee. And a shareholders committee is a body where not 50 or 200 or 600 owners are represented. They are represented, but they're not there in person. Consists of 5 to 6 people. And it is for these 5 to 6 people to unify the different aspects of ownership within the family and to present a unified point of view versus management. Take the question of dividends. There will be owners who want, for good reason, higher dividends. In many family-owned companies, there's a policy, the maximum payout is 20% of the profit should go as dividends, the 80% should be plowed into the company. I remember little anecdote, when I was first chief executive, we had a downturn in the economy and accordingly in our business, and our profits went down. And my chairman, Dr. Hinkle at that time, said we have to lower the dividends. And I was averse to that because I was quite new to the job and I didn't want to create the image of my first suggestion, so to speak, to lower the dividends for the family. And eventually we left the dividend as it was and things ironed out and things became better. Maybe my attitude was not very brave, but at least it was politically right. But there was, you can see from that example, there were differences of opinion within the family. Dr. Hinkle, who was relatively rich, being the grandson of the founder, wasn't dependent on dividends, but there were many other members of the family who felt that income was very important for keeping up the normal style of life. And these different opinions in, let's say, dividends have to be unified by a shareholders committee. Another example, some family members in Hinkle, and I use it as an example, wanted our business to be much stronger in the United States for reasons of security versus the Soviet Union and the rest. But investing in the United States for a European company against the big ones is not an easy thing to do. So we had to come to a conclusion how we could go to the United States, create ownership for the family, ownership through our company, but at the same time not endanger our growth prospects in Europe. And we eventually achieved that. And we achieved it because the shareholders committee, together with management, was able to work out a strategy which satisfied both motives. And that could not have been the case if we, as managers, had been talking to 30 owners, because we would never have reached agreement. And it would always have been, at the end, the defeat of one opinion and the victory of the other. But if you talk in terms of victory or defeat within a family, you wreck the family. Clear? I think it's, you said education. It's corporate governance, but it's you don't need much education to say, well, I want, if we have 40 people or 50 people in a room and we want to have an opinion which we can all live with, we cannot reach this opinion by discussing it among 50 people. So we set up a committee and so on and so on. It's an educational process, but the educational process comes out of doing things.
My point was based on experience in the region, where I have seen the default situation where sons want to and are sometimes imposed to step in the shoes of their fathers. Whereas the position is they could be excellent doctors, they can be excellent archaeologists if they want, but at the same time they should invest in their knowledge as being active and informed owners.